Hello, friends. It's Binge O'Clock, the podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle and I've seen almost nothing.
But she's almost halfway through with Almost Human.
Almost halfway through.
So yes, Almost Human, Episode 6, Arrhythmia. For fans of robotic hearts out there, this is your episode. But not in the way you think. Robotic hearts are being sold on the black market. And it's up to the police force to find them and bring them back, which I thought was kind of weird because they didn't even involve the health department at all. But it's fine. When Dorian sees another DRN, he pulls him in for a ride-along and hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue!
Wacky hijinks.
I can't wait to get into it. But before we do, Joy, what weren't the police ready for this week?
Well, the good news is it wasn't a lot. It's not that they weren't exactly prepared for stuff. It was more like, well, that's horrifying and new. How can we stop that right now?
100%. I actually think most of the tech I listed in this episode is, and there was not a lot, was technology that the police used successfully. Right?
Yes. Finally.
Finally. Like there.
It finally happened.
It finally happened. Wait, by most, I mean they used one thing well. And the one thing they used well was the universal translation device.
Which is literally just a speaker that translates a woman speaking in Cantonese to Detective Stahl. And it goes relatively smoothly. Although for those of you who need the subtitles, I'm so sorry because that's not at all what she says that the translator says she says. Although, if we have any fans who speak Cantonese, I would love to actually know what she says in the script. Because I know sometimes that's entirely different.
I would be really curious to know that as well. There was a lot going on in that scene. And the translator worked both ways, I assume, and was translating what Stahl was saying back to the woman. But they used it. That was great.
I was a little sad that we didn't get at least Stahl's, like, I understand in Cantonese. I feel like she just kind of said, I understand. And I was like...
Well, I guess it's one of those things where the woman that Stahl was interviewing understands English but isn't as comfortable communicating in it. The show doesn't make that clear, but you know what? You're right. There was no Cantonese coming out of that machine. There was only English coming out of that machine.
Only English, but I would hope it's a two-way. Like you said, it's not to say that she couldn't understand. I understand. But they should have made an effort. Mm-hmm. But yes, moving on.
Moving on to the other piece of technology that the police used in this episode. Joy, I want to hear what you called it. I have written it down or noted it as the least subtle listening device ever.
It's so true. I called it the super obvious voice detector, I think. Super obvious speech detector. On the side of the heart chest.
It is on, they stick it on the outside of the heart of the icebox.
Right under the handle, which, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I pick up boxes, I look for a handle. So I'm like, my eyes are going to go to it. And it looks like you can see the waves of sound as they travel across the thing with what everybody says. Why would you do this? Who thought this was a good idea?
It lights up green every time someone speaks.
Every time someone talks. Who decided on this? Who created this? Was this a gag gift and you were just like, I know what to do with that, and you slapped it on an ice chest? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Here's the other way it fails. That device is supposed to do two things. It's supposed to listen in on conversations that are happening around it, and it's also supposed to track just heat signatures around it, so that presumably if it's in a building, it will be able to tell you how many people are in the building. But the instant this tracking device enters a building, the structure of the building blocks the thermal tracking. So, great. Good job.
And it was so weird, too, because I had a moment where I was like, well, is this the bad guys being able to anticipate a thing? And then I was like, no, not at all, as we will get into later, because these bad guys don't know exactly what they're doing is bad.
Yeah, and they as established in the show, they move from warehouse to warehouse, presumably to ensure that they can't be as easily tracked. So this is just a temporary structure for them. They definitely didn't build it with this thermal tracking device in mind.
This is rent a warehouse.
Rent a warehouse.
How can we help you? We are only interested in warehouses that can block thermal signatures. Do you have any like that? Well, it just so happens that we do, right down by the seaside. With a lovely view of the city. Like,
yeah.
It's fine.
Yep. So, there are two pieces of tech in the episode, and the police department uses one of them well. Semi-well.
Yes. Although, I will say the piece of tech that they were not prepared for was probably those, what was it, the graph-finding circuit module?
Oh, yes. They called them, or Rudy called it, a graphene circuit modification.
Yes, which I can only imagine is an actual piece of healthcare tech that bad guys have changed to not exactly monitor the life cycle of an organ, but now be used to be like, oh, did you not make a payment? Great, we're going to shut it off because it's a, what is it?
Graphene circuit modification?
No, the what? The actual bad thing the bad guys are doing. My brain completely blanked.
Their extortion
It's an extortion
racket.
ring.
Their extortion racket, yes.
It's a racket. It's a physical racket you hit people with until they give you money.
Yep. Every single person with one of these hearts is, quote, on borrowed time. Terrible. You know what? I feel like let's just use this to segue right into our episode issue.
Yes,
because
the episode issue.
We can't talk about the episode issue without discussing these Vastral alphas anyway.
Yeah. And it is it's one of those things where like almost like a late stage capitalism issue of, well, we've screwed up the healthcare industry so badly that this is the only way some people can find organs.
And by screwed up, we really just mean have never been able to repair. Because
exactly,
we know that the current health system is broken. And look, it's still terrible in 2048. I guess. It's just terrible in new and frightening ways.
Oh, so many frightening ways.
Still
it's
terrible.
Horrifying.
Still terrible. Now with more tech.
We're back to our episode 1 issue of like, we've just decided to make the worst thing worse.
By throwing technology at it. Maybe if we throw technology at it, it'll just naturally get better. The answer is no, it did not.
The answer is no, it did not.
I mean, the whole thing opens up in a hospital, presumably. I think I've said that word 5 times already this episode. I'm going to stop saying it now.
It does open in a hospital. What struck me in our current healthcare system, in something that felt like either a free clinic or like an access to healthcare, like a fast track. Oh, do you just have a cold? Great, we'll just prescribe you some antibiotics. Like in this very cramped, very loud, almost waiting room with like people waiting in lines to see a holographic doctor who is listening to your symptoms and then recommending things and presumably prescribing you medication. Oh, and I think this is the first episode where we get the misdirect in the beginning where you think it's going to be the guy complaining, but actually it's someone else who comes in with a gun. They always come in with a gun.
And this poor person who's dealing with the hollow doctor, literally the hollow doctor shorts out as it is about to tell the man whether or not he has a neurological syndrome. Like, truly frightening. And it's funny
like one of those things of like, we regret to tell you that you might have a
what? A what? Damn it. Oops. And it's funny that you saw that and thought maybe it was a free health clinic, because I think that it looks like one. But of course, as Leonard Lee comes in, you see that upstairs, so just above all of the hollow doctors and those people waiting in line, there's a fully outfitted OR. There's whatever machine Leonard Lee was looking for. So the question is this a free health clinic, or are all of the hospitals in 2048 this awful?
It's a great, awful question.
Mm-hmm.
And it does feel like the kind of technology that as soon as it was created, don't you think every single hospital would adopt it? Or is that every single emergency room? Right? Because there are a lot of people who come to the emergency room, and not that every single person who comes to an emergency room doesn't have an emergency, but there are some people who come to an emergency room because they don't have any health care, or they don't have a regular GP, or they don't have insurance. Basically, they have to, in giant quotation marks, go to the emergency room because otherwise they won't get care. So someone who just has a really bad headache, for example, might just show up in the emergency room, and someone who has an emergency where they need to be immediately rushed into surgery is able to get the care. So, like, maybe this is every emergency room, which still doesn't make it great because
it's not great.
Like, it's bad. It's a bad...
Well, also like, because it
makes me uncomfortable thinking about it.
Yeah. And part of the reason it's bad is because the show constructs a world in which these hollow doctors are not actually very well built.
Right.
Because it shorted out in the middle of giving him his diagnosis.
And it was like, well, the red light's on, someone's coming to fix it. Mm-hmm. And that's what, like, the orderly says who's, like, cleaning up the waiting room. Like, it's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
And... yes. And then there's Leonard Lee.
And then there's Leonard Lee, which the other part of the healthcare system that this show decides to focus in on is the organ donor.
Organ transplant patients.
Yes.
And the system that is required for the... we're just trying to say that getting an organ is both easier and more difficult in the future. For very different reasons.
For very different reasons. And listen, here's what happens. There are people who need organ transplants. And in 2021, if you need an organ transplant, you have to get on a list because you have to wait until an organ donor passes away and the organ donor's blood type has to match your blood type. We are all aware of this. But in 2048, according to this show, organs can either be grown directly from stem cells, though those are really, really high end, or organs can be built. There are biomech organs. And so most people stick to the biomech organs because they're a little bit cheaper and they're easier to get. And for some reason, the list still exists.
The list still exists.
Why?
But the list... So the list that Richard Lee was on was because he didn't have insurance, so he was denied.
He was denied, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it basically comes down to, do you have the right number to pay? Even though this is for the upper middle class. So, like, what do the poor people do? I guess they just die.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the scarcity is artificial.
Yes.
We're not actually waiting for organ donors to pass away. We're not actually waiting for... two people to have blood types that happen to match. Because with a biomech heart, that isn't really an issue anymore. And if you can just build biomech hearts, you should just build more of them.
Yes.
The scarcity is made up. And it is so frustrating. On top of which, wait, there's one more extra piece that makes this terrible. For some reason, and the reason is people are greedy and they would like to make money. Every time a person with a biomech organ passes away, the biomech organ that person has needs to be destroyed. It cannot. It is illegal for that biomech organ to be given to someone else.
That is a very good point that I didn't even think of. That makes no sense. You are 100% correct. That creates the scarcity.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Not only are they not manufacturing more and more of these as they should be, they are destroying perfectly good ones.
I hate it. I hate everything about it.
I hate it.
Folks, this episode was very entertaining and good to watch, but just like most episodes with this show, you think about it just a little bit and it kind of all comes crumbling down around you.
Yeah.
2048 is bleak.
2048 is bleak. And so there are
There's your episode title.
Oh, no. And so all of these people are on this list and they are waiting for organ transplants. Meanwhile, they are getting closer and closer to the heart failures they know are in their future. which forces them and their families to turn to the black market. And people like Henry Mills.
And people like Henry Mills. Well, so before we talk about Henry Mills.
Okay.
Because, goodness, that man. Just to tack on to also what you were saying about, like, how damaging this is to the society as a whole. The cops actually show up in the middle of one of these operations and save a woman who, as soon as she wakes up, is just like, what are you doing? I need that heart to survive. And, like, that is so gut-wrenching. And, like, even when she's talking to Valerie Stahl, she's like, I know you think you saved me, but you didn't. Mm-hmm. I am still going to die.
Yes, and Valerie tries to tell her, and it's an extortion racket. You're on borrowed time. They would have doubled the payment you owe every month. They would have tripled it until you weren't able to pay it. And the woman responds, but I still would have gotten more time. And that's all I want, more time with my family.
And the time I can't pay for except by doing this. Like, it's such
really,
a heartbreaking
really awful
scene. Mm-hmm. Did you want to actually talk about Henry Mills, or should we talk about Synth Pride instead? Because at least Synth Pride was nice.
That's fair. Well, the only reason I was going to mention Henry Mills is because I think that there's a twist with Henry Mills. They originally set up Henry Mills as this sympathetic character who sees this utterly broken system and just wants to fix it. You know, like, oh, look, these perfectly good hearts or other organs are being thrown away because the powers that be are greedy. What if I took these and I gave them to people in need? And that's how they set up his character. And then, of course, there's the twist where it turns out, oh, actually, Dr. Keating is the one who's kept completely in the dark. And Henry Mills is at the top of this little pyramid organization.
Henry Mills is a very complicated character. I feel like had the show continued on, I think we would have seen more of Henry Mills, because I like that he was, and you're probably going to notice this a lot, listeners, but I tend to like the villains. I think he's absolutely despicable, and I love to watch him. He was very complicated because he, like you said, they set him up as this very sympathetic character. As soon as the cops show up, they basically show him a picture of someone who's died. And the first thing he says is, you guys are cops. You know how many people die every day. Am I supposed to recognize this person? Mm-hmm. Like, and then it becomes he doesn't hold anything, quote unquote, hold anything back. Mm-hmm. There is some lies of omission, which eventually catch up to him. But he does straight out say, oh, I sold it. I sold it to someone who's trying to make a difference. And then you follow the courier, and then you follow the doctor, and then the doctor leads you, not even to him, not even to Henry Mills, leads you to the assistant at Vastral, who is someone else who's been tied up in this, and who, and like everyone only knows just enough.
The assistant who's named Jacinta? But answers the phone as Karen. Karen. When I watched it, I texted Joy. Of course, her name is Karen.
I know.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to everyone named Karen. I'm sorry that this is something you have to live with and carry with you now.
Yes, I have an Aunt Karen, and I can confirm she is not a Karen. But oh boy, has Karen become a thing in the zeitgeist of Year of Our Lord 2021.
Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Continue.
No, but it all leads back to Henry Mills, who was very specific enough to like only tell people what they needed to know and play those little games. And like, you can, if you watch the episode again, you can even sort of see it with the courier, because you'll notice he's acting quote unquote very nervous. And the courier's kind of looking at him, expecting him to say more, mm-hmm. right? I got the impression, knowing what we know about Henry Mills, of the courier just being like, is that it? Like, he was waiting for more instructions, and then was kind of like, okay. And he took the box. Mm-hmm. With the very obvious speaker tracker on its side.
Very obvious listening device. It's good that you brought that up. I don't think that I noticed that. I don't think that I understood why the courier was so nervous in that moment. You're right. He was waiting for more instructions from his boss.
I feel like he was waiting for more. and his boss was being very sort of like, yep, it's just one, and not even looking at him in the eye. And I feel like the courier, who is weirdly like the second most intelligent person in this entire thing, who like knows when to clam up and knows when to be like, he gets taken in by the cops and he's just like, I'm just tired, man. Can I just go home? Like, he doesn't give them anything.
But is that because he literally doesn't know anything, or is that because he's smart?
Can it be both?
Can it be both? Why not both?
Like, I feel like the courier is probably the second most intelligent person, because he's also the one that's like, well, crap, I know where this is going, and he takes the box and he takes it. You know what I mean? He's
probably the least intelligent person in this organization is Dr. Keating. Because can we discuss how Dr. Keating is personally responsible for adding the mods to every biomech heart and doesn't put together what these mods actually do? Like, they just lie to him and tell him, because Dr. Keating is a, quote, good person, and he actually thinks that he's doing an illegal thing that is saving people's lives and that the whole system is broken, and this is how he can, I don't know, make a difference in the world in a positive way. But he's responsible for adding the mods to the heart, and they just lie to him and they tell him that the mods are there for remote diagnostics, and he's just like, okay, no questions asked. What?
And in 3 years, have you ever had an issue with any of these robotic hearts? That seems interesting, don't you think?
That is so, it is, in 3 years, he never actually used the mods to remotely diagnose anyone or fix any issues. Also, he's a doctor who works with biotech. He should be able to identify these mods and what they do. So, no, Dr. Keating, by and large, the least intelligent person in this little organization.
And it's his description of them that makes me think that this was a healthcare thing beforehand. Mm-hmm. I mean, okay, you could read it either way, right? You could read it as like, this is a tech thing for black market hearts specifically because you can't go to a hospital and check out your heart because it's a black market heart and you don't want anybody to know and a blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. You could read it that way. Or you could read it the way that's like, well, I've seen these before. I know what they do. And he just puts together that it's like, but no one's actually ever called me for maintenance.
Yeah.
On any of these.
Right.
In 3 years.
Very strange. Very, very,
Dr.
very
Keating.
strange.
Dr. Keating, one of the good ones who thought he was a good one, but he's not.
No, well, he's good, but he just needs to ask more questions. Ask more questions.
I know. There's also a part of me of just like, you know, there's a level of doctor that like, you know what you know and that's it, and no one else can tell you otherwise. And I'm just like, no, don't be that guy. No.
No. Wait, stop.
Wait,
don't do
stop.
It.
Stop.
I do think we should, speaking of robotic hearts, maybe transition over to talking about the other robotic hearts in this show.
Synth Pride.
About Synth Pride.
My beautiful Synth Pride. This was a really good Synth Pride episode, and I think it was you that was just like, I feel like the Buddy Buddy is back.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. It feels like we're back in... I almost said we're back in Skin, and that felt weird.
Yeah. I mean, this episode is similarly bleak.
Yes, it's true. But yes, I feel like we're back in the relationship that we saw in Skin. There we go. That's better.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of back and forth. It's not as mean.
They sort of hit their stride when it comes to the bickering, but also the like, you know, and I think you were the one who brought it up where it's like it starts with a mini not argument, like a tiff in the car. Yes. about Kennick's like slamming down on the radio because the station won't come in.
Exactly. And Dorian says to him, keep banging on it, caveman. That should make it work.
Yup. And then because he's banging on it, he runs a red light. It was red. It was yellow. It was red. It was yellow. Do you want me to tell you it was red? Because it was red 2.6 seconds.
Do you want me to print out a photo to show you? Oh, yeah, well, issue me a ticket. Disco face. I just did it.
I'm going to try not to get into the episode tick by tick thing because it was very choice.
We can't recount every single one of their little arguments, but that was a particularly good one, and the episode opened with it, so.
Yes, it's true. And that's the one we get. But so once they show up at the hospital to investigate Leonard Lee's passing, they find a DRN working on these hollow doctors. And, Dorian is instantly just like, damn. Like, he is taken aback. He's not used to seeing, first of all, another DRN anywhere. Mm-hmm. In the police precinct, let alone doing a completely different job. And Kennick's just being like, oh, hey, must be weird seeing yourself, huh? And I'm just like, there are moments when Kennick's gets it, that he has a robotic partner who feels human, and like he can make a joke like that, and like an MX would be like, I see me all the time. What are you talking about? Like in a very... Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, Dorian is just like, I'm just not used to seeing one of us working on hospital tech. Like, we're not built for healthcare. We're built to be cops. Like, what is he doing here? Mm-hmm. And so then Dorian has the great idea. And I knew it was a bad idea as soon as he did it, because
definitely
of course
a bad idea.
To take DRN 494 on a ride along with them.
Long story short, it goes terribly.
It goes about as horribly as you expected it to go, friends. Like, he's very obviously not a cop anymore. Mm-hmm. Even though he is asking cop-like questions and, like, really wants to, like, bust some bad guys for a minute there. Uh-huh. But
he doesn't have his updated files. He doesn't have the updated protocol. So at one point, when they're in the middle of the street, he stops the car, jumps out, and runs toward a person who has already done their time years or months ago, however long it was wanted for armed robbery.
It's so heartbreaking, too, because he's just like, give me your cuffs. I'm going to take him in. And it's just like, and and it's the Kennick slow turn to be like, what just happened?
What?
And Dorian has to be like, I may have given him his files back and possibly some access to the police database. My bad.
My bad. Well, this does kickstart, though, one of their more tender moments, which I really liked. Because, they have the fun buddy cop banter, but in this episode, like you said, and similar to Skin, they also bring back some of those heart-to-hearts, and this was one of them.
Yes. He basically, he banishes not Dorian to the car. And why are we riding with Mr. Fix-It? What is this about? Like, level with me. What's happening right now? And Dorian is just very genuinely honest and is like, look, just before they shut me off, I was really sincerely hoping somebody would be there to wake me up. And you woke me up. And I was hoping to be that guy for this guy. And I'm just, I love
that Dorian says, it was you. And John goes, everyone makes mistakes.
I know.
And
this is how they bond.
They just smile at each other gently. And it's the most beautiful thing.
It's very cute.
It's
so cute. But, Dorian also has his own coming to grips with the fact that this DRN is no longer a cop. Mm-hmm. And I got very, there's like the mentor-mentee vibes. And I also, and this is something I think I forgot to mention when you and I were running through stuff. I also get very, when a cop retires and then like maybe they're not, up on the latest protocols or they're not, but like they really still want to help out. And then they realize, oh, wait, I'm retired and I literally can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. This felt like that.
Oh, that's so interesting. I almost read it in a similar but opposite way. Mm-hmm. Because...
Can't wait to hear how.
similar but opposite way. Because, like you were saying, that kind of mentor-mentee relationship, or, dare I say it, father-son relationship, where I think that Dorian brought along this, not Dorian, with the, by the way, yellow disco face. because
Which
I
was
guess
weird, because I was like, does yellow mean healthcare?
No, I'm pretty sure that all that is the show was worried that we wouldn't be able to tell them apart. So he gets a yellow disco face. There we go. Even though they're wearing completely different clothes. Doesn't matter. The almost a father-son relationship because, Dorian decides to bring this DRN along in this ride along. And it's like Dorian so desperately wants this DRN to be a cop just like him, to be a cop because he was built to be a cop. And then kind of by the end of the episode, in that moment, I read it as that moment where the parent finally has to let go and say like, oh no, this kid doesn't want to be a cop just like me. This kid is actually fine. And this kid is happy where he is.
This kid is doing his job.
Yeah.
There's a really touching moment where the not Dorian, we shouldn't say that, where the DRN. It's so easy though.
It is so easy.
Yellow disco face Dorian. It's not all bad for him. There's a moment at the end of the episode where he's like, you know what? This was the moment where I felt like I was the best cop I could possibly be. And thank you for returning this information to me, because without you doing that, I never would have remembered this. Because, they scrub everything. And there's a really lovely moment where, Dorian, of course, has to take away his access to the files and take away his quote unquote memories of stuff. Mm-hmm. But he leaves that memory for him because he's able to tell him about it. And Dorian's able to be like, I don't need to take that away. Like, why should I take away what you appreciated about human beings and what made you feel like a good cop?
His proudest moment as a cop and the look that was the most human connection he'd ever had. That was a really sweet note for this episode to end on.
Well, the button that it actually ended on was
true, because
Dorian...
this show never lets you end on a moment like that. Absolutely never.
By the way, I had forgotten that Dorian could literally take control of the car at a moment's notice, and so we're watching the episode, and I was just like, I watched the car lurch forward, and the first time he does it, and I'm just like, oh, I forgot he could do that. This is another Dorian superpower. He can literally drive the car that Kennex is sitting in the driver's seat of, independent of Kennex, which ended up being another cute synth pride moment. Because he was just like, let me have my way, and I'll give you control of the car. I'll do it.
No, wait. Now that you're saying Dorian superpowers, we forgot to mention a Dorian superpower from this episode.
Oh.
The way that he brings in Henry Mills.
Yes, there's such a quick... It's so fast. I think... I don't even know how fast it is, but it feels like 30 seconds of dialogue between Dorian and Kennex, because Dorian was able to see a thermal imaging scan of what we eventually find out is a dead body on the floor, and which has also, the floor has been cleaned recently, and also there's literally no dead body to be seen, and there aren't a lot of dead bodies in giant quotation marks. They're not seeing, quote-unquote, a lot of people drop dead from not paying. They're only seeing a couple of people drop dead. And I'm just like, the amount of police work that goes into this 30 seconds.
It was a great 30 seconds.
It was a great 30 seconds. But it all starts with Dorian being like, I can see a thermal outline of a body.
They go to Jacinta's house, and the floor is warm. Why is the floor warm, Joy?
Because she did.
Because Henry Mills went to her house and killed her. Her blood was all over the floor. Then he used...
And unfortunately...
Well, her blood was all over the floor, and he used some DNA bomb-esque thing to clean up all trace of the blood, but the warmth was left in the floor. And so Dorian found it.
Thermal imaging was a big deal in this episode.
Thermal imaging is just one example. It's an all-use technology that the writers throw at the show whenever they need the cops to be able to move forward in a case. Because, just going back to the episode before this, when Dorian is tracking Maya through the forest, he's tracking Maya through the forest using thermal imaging. So I guess her footprints are leaving warmth on the forest floor. That is how he found her. How does that make any kind of sense?
Through her shoes.
Through her shoes. Or her body is just leaving wafts of warmth in the air? Question mark?
That's not at all how any of that works.
It's not how any of this works.
And look, if my obsession with ghost hunters has taught me anything, thermal imaging works with a very specific mask in a very specific place.
But anyway, there was blood on the floor. The blood on the floor isn't there anymore. At which point Kennex and Dorian have this great little 30 seconds conversation in which they crack the case.
They crack it. It's done. That's it. We did it. Like, and you know, spoilers, it's Henry Mills. Like, it's, who do we know can get rid of a body fast? Like, it's fine.
I really enjoyed it. I was okay with the little fast forward.
I mean, I enjoyed it also. I think it was one of those things on a second look, when you really sat down to really listen to what they were saying. I didn't understand why these things didn't come up, because we do get, like, you know, knights around a round table scene at the police, like, where there's Richard Paul and there's Valerie and there's, you know, I almost said Lily Taylor, and there's Captain Maldonado. Like, they're all there, they're all talking, and you wouldn't think for a second that somebody didn't go, wait
a minute. Why haven't more bodies with secondhand hearts turned up? That's a really good point, because when they get to Jacinta's house and the floor is warm, they don't actually gather any new information in that moment. They had all the information they needed.
The way he puts it together is by saying, why aren't we seeing more bodies? And Dorian says something like,
secondhand hearts.
Yes. Well, why aren't we seeing more people drop dead is actually what he says. He says, why aren't we seeing more people drop dead? Why is it only the people who are defaulting on payments? And it's like 2 people. He gets this thought being like, why aren't there more bodies? And Dorian's like, well, they sanitized the floor. And Kennex is like, that's not what I mean. We only have 2 dead bodies. Why aren't more people dropping? If this is a extortion racket and supposedly hundreds of these hearts are in the public, why aren't more people dropping dead?
Right,
why
like
haven't more people dropped dead?
Surely before Leonard, other people defaulted on their payments, is the way he phrases it.
The thing is he doesn't put that together until only 2 people drop dead. And I was just like, but if you're paying
Yeah, it was 3 by that point.
If you count Leonard, it's 3.
Yeah.
If you're counting Leonard, it's 3. But yeah, it's you know, they don't technically know that it's been, quote unquote, 3 years since all of this has started yet. But they make that leap without their little round table of cops. And I was just a little bit like, you guys didn't think of this before. It didn't bother me in the watching of the episode. It's like you said before, like every other episode. It's like, it wasn't a thing I focused on when I watched it the first time. I watched it the second time to take notes, and I was like, maybe it does bother me just a little bit.
At any rate, that is what leads them to Henry Mills, because they should either be seeing bodies with second-hand hearts, or they should be seeing bodies that are missing hearts, because Henry Mills would have taken the second-hand hearts out and reuse them because they're expensive and lucrative, and that's the crux of his business. The PD has no record of bodies showing up without hearts over the last 3 years, but what they do have is a missing persons list, which when cross-referenced with the list of rejected applicants, gives them 36 names. Henry Mills has disposed of 36 people in 3 years.
Yeah.
As part of his extortion racket. Gross.
Yep.
So in reality, what this person is a serial killer.
Yes, this person is a serial killer.
Who, fortunately, Dorian manages to catch by juggernauting through 12 rooms.
Yes, and this is where we firmly land in the Scooby-Doo category. Like, before Danielle got to this point in the episode, she was just like, this feels like a lot of Scooby-Doo villain mask tearing off, and like, it's someone else. No, wait, It's someone else completely different.
Exactly.
And then when we finally get to the actual villain, and I was like, oh no, now we're in an office building with doors. I was like, but Dorian doesn't need any doors because he's just like, I'm just going to bust through a wall. That's how this works, right?
Well, because the way the building is structured is that there's this wide hallway that's in the outer square, and there are all these cubicles in the center of the giant warehouse. So Kennex has to run all the way around the outer hallway, but Dorian just beelines straight through all the center offices and then busts out the other side.
It's just so amazing.
It was beautiful.
It was a beautiful apprehend. And I feel like Henry Mills is just that character that had the show had a longer run. I feel like we would have seen Henry Mills again.
He has real recurring villain energy or potential, yes. I suppose.
Definitely. Especially with his last speech to Dorian at the end.
I love that we just said that in unison and thought of that at the same time. That's my favorite thing.
She's like, yeah, and you must be silly, right? Because you can look at us with your immortality and we're just buying for more time, man.
Must be nice to have all the time in the world. So slimy. Which, I think we've about wrapped up the episode.
I think
Joy,
so, too.
Should I talk about my one more thing? Would you like to discuss one more thing?
Well, I think what we were just talking about leads into my one more thing.
Unless you want to go with your other one more thing, because we
Unless I want to go with my other one more thing.
We did not mention your other one more thing.
That's true. So, yes, I'm going to go with my other... Listeners, I had two one more things. I know, this week I get to cheat. One of them was how intelligent Henry Mills is. But also, can I just say, when I was watching this show, I was also watching Once Upon a Time. And I was just like, but the Henry Mills I know is a hero. How dare you? The Henry Mills I know is a hero. Dang it. But yes, my other one more thing is the Luger test, which we find out in this episode, which is how the police department decided which DRNs they would keep and which DRNs they would deactivate. But eventually they decided even the Luger test was not a very good test. And they just, in my brain, like out of preservation, just took all of them out of commission. Mm-hmm. Wait, I have one more things.
Oh, goodness. Well, the Luger test.
The Luger test. And then Maldonado actually says, do you have any idea how much those things cost when one of the MXs gets trashed? I was like, wait a minute.
We need to keep a running record of how many times MXs are nonchalantly destroyed in this show, because it happens.
A drone smashes into him and he smashes into a car and then he's like stuck there. And all I could think of was Maldonado is saying this to someone who literally shoved an MX out of his car and does not care at all.
And then there was that MX whose poor eye got blown out when Rudy messed up that chemical Benz formula that he was trying to make.
And the synthetic with his legs who are no longer attached to his body. Like,
there's so many MXs just nonchalantly tossed to the side. It's so sad.
Poor logic machine.
I feel bad for them. The toasters.
The toasters. They're just trying. They're trying their best, man.
Wait, was that the third one more thing?
That was the third one more thing. Okay, and I'm done. I promise.
You're allowed to have 3 one more things. We're doing okay on time.
Our cap is 3.
Okay, well, if I could discuss one more thing about this episode, it would be that this episode mentioned the wall for the 3rd time in this show, and they still haven't told me what the wall is. They mentioned it, I think, in the pilot when the MX is speaking to Kennex and Kennex is in the car. The MX says something about, oh, there's something going on over at the wall. Fine. And then in Van Full of Clones, what's the actual name of that episode? Blood Brothers.
Blood Brothers, yes.
In Blood Brothers, who is it who someone mentions to Maldonado that there was an incident over at the wall. Then in this episode, Kennex tells Dorian that if the not Dorian steps out of the car one more time, he's going to throw him over the wall himself. I'm going to be that guy for him. So we've mentioned the wall 3 times. Beetlejuice rules tell me that they need to actually show the wall now. The truth that I've constructed in my mind is that the city is walled in.
I mean, that makes sense.
There's a world outside the wall, and the world outside the wall is even more terrible than the world inside the wall. But I don't know, because they keep mentioning the wall and they won't tell me what it is. Grr.
As someone who only barely remembers the series, I feel like you and I are going to have a lot of deep digging into what the wall is and how the wall affects daily life for the people in the city. Where are we supposed to be, by the way? Have they said?
No, they haven't. I don't think so.
Generic city number 5.
City number 5.
Could be Chicago, could be New York. Like,
you know, actually, every time they do that shot where they just, like, almost like a helicopter is going over the top of the city, I wonder where it is actually, what city that actually is. Because it has that cool little, eyeball shaped above the road highway. Have you noticed that over on, like, the right-hand corner of the screen?
Yes, I have.
And they definitely picked that flyover because they thought, like, oh, this looks so futuristic. But I don't know what city that actually is.
I mean, we could probably do some...
Could we look it up?
Very light Googling.
Yeah, probably. Are we going to?
We could probably do some...
No.
Not gonna happen, listener. Look, you've got the Google in your pocket. You could Google that yourself. This isn't a factual show. No, but there is... there's a part of me that wants to be like, I don't think we get to it. Just because 13 episodes. So I have a feeling... I have a feeling in episode 14, you and I are going to make up some very interesting fanfic about what the wall is and how that affects daily life in this city number 5.
I would love to. I can't wait to do that.
I do wonder, I feel like no one outside the police has mentioned the wall? No, wait. Do we actually know who mentions it in Blood Brothers?
It is. His name is Emmett Avery. Emmett? Is it Emmett?
Oh.
Yeah, Emmett Avery says it to Maldonado. Because when he's
never mind.
Giving that little
speech, then the public does know about the wall. I was going to say, maybe it's a police cover-up.
Oh, interesting. No, I'm imagining that this is a walled city. This is a Ba Sing Se kind of situation, and we've never gotten to see outside the wall. Or maybe this is outside the wall, and that's why the world is so terrible. Maybe there's an inside the wall where it's actually really nice, and they did fix healthcare and the police force and... everything.
I can't wait to read our fanfics about what this would be.
Maybe we
should write a fanfic for episode 14.
There's an inner wall where things aren't 400% worse.
No, I love that. I love that it's like, this is the center of Ba Sing Se. What is beyond the center ring? No one really knows. No emperor ventures forth from there.
All right. Well, before we take you too far off the tracks, dear listeners, I think we should wrap up this beautiful podcast episode.
Yes.
Saying,
I think so.
I think so. By saying, we would love to hear from you. Please check us out. We're at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, what advice would you give your younger self? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com.
That's right. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the healthcare workers in your life that you love them, appreciate them, and that they're doing a great job. And we'll see you next time.